generally what I recommend is asking for what has worked for you in the past and also bringing in a doctor's note from your physician that maybe lists out a couple of accommodations that you're looking for. And I find that that can go a long way. Now, another really great resource that I recommend is called the Job Accommodation Network. It's Jan. And if you go to askjan.org, they have a whole repository of information about medical accommodations in the workplace.
Welcome to The Uptick, brought to you by the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders, empowering children and adults through education, advocacy, and research by sharing the stories and experiences relevant to the TS community.
Welcome back to The Uptick, and thank you for joining us. Just a couple of quick announcements before we begin. For those of you in the New Jersey area, on Saturday, September 21st, NJCTS is hosting an in-person community connections at the Bliss Coffee Lounge in Somerville. This is a great opportunity for adults to meet other adults with TS and share a light meal or snack. You can register in advance on njcts.org/event. Also, our 20th anniversary gala is on October 17th at the Bridgewater Marriott in Bridgewater, New Jersey. You don't want to miss this. The gala helps us raise funds for all the programming we do as an organization, including our youth advocacy programs, education outreach, congressional lobbying, and family retreats. Now I want to transition to today's topic. I wanted to devote this episode to sharing some job search tips and strategies for being a neurodivergent professional in the workplace. When I'm not recording these podcasts, I work as an HR consultant and a career coach. This year has been particularly grueling and challenging for many job seekers. The challenges vary by industry, but overall, this is what we would call an employer's market. And what that means is that the employers, those doing the hiring, hold most of the power right now. And for candidates, what it means is a typical candidate has to apply to more jobs to get interviews than they may have in the past. And it's also taking longer to get a job offer than in past years. Companies are being very selective with who they interview because they have more candidates to choose from than in the past. You know, it used to be that people got a job, they took the offer, and then they stopped job searching. Now, for a lot of reasons, many people get a job and then they keep job searching. So they've got a job, they're trying to get something better, maybe higher pay, better culture, better fit, whatever it is. And so you have those applications adding to the competition in the job market as well. People who have a job and people who don't and are trying to get one. So it ends up just making things more complicated for everyone. And then that's on top of some of the unique challenges that we face as neurodivergent candidates and professionals. As a career coach, I talk to job candidates almost every day, and I've seen a lot of the challenges that people are going through. I've also seen what's working, what strategies are helping people get interviews faster, what's helping them get job offers. I want to share some of my tips and best practices for those of you looking for a job and for those of you that are comfortably in a job and looking to make the most of your experience. Some of you who are already working may find this episode relevant as well, because I'll be talking about disclosure, accommodations in the workplace. Now, I should preface this by saying that my advice is not going to be relevant for everyone, but I do hope it will be helpful for many of you, particularly those early in your career, working in a professional field or an office environment. Now, to start off, I do want to dive into the topic of disclosure. That's a topic that comes up a lot in Tourette circles, and it's often on many people's minds. Whether you should disclose or not and how best to do that is going to depend on a lot of factors that are really mostly unique to you and how your condition affects you. As you probably know, legally, companies cannot discriminate against you because of a diagnosis. Unfortunately, it does still happen, and it can be very difficult to prove. So for job seekers that have more mild to moderate tics and co-occurring conditions, if you can, I do recommend trying to punt that topic and delay it a little bit longer, ideally until you get the offer and accept it, and then you can disclose, just to minimize any chance of that being used against you, against your knowledge, as a reason the company wouldn't hire you. Now, a lot of people don't have that privilege of being able to wait or hide their tics or things like that. Or there's the question of what do you do if you're in an interview and you start ticking because we're nervous, we're stressed, it happens, we're excited, and they see some of this. Then in that case, it may be in your best interest to just go ahead and do your disclosure. My personal advice is to practice a disclosure speech in advance, rehearse it in front of the mirror, and get some feedback on how it sounds. I like to make my disclosure speeches a little short and sweet, kind of to the point. I'll mention, oh, yeah, what you just saw there was a tic. I have mild to moderate Tourette Syndrome, and it causes me to make some uncontrollable movements and sounds. I've had it since I was a kid. I'm pretty used to it, and it shouldn't pose any challenges in the workplace. I've been able to go through my whole professional life with it. It was something like that, where you're basically acknowledging it. Hey, I just ticked, or you may see me tick in this interview. Here's what it is. Use your own words and put your own flavor on it, so it feels like you. Embracing kind of a no big deal attitude. Between us, we know that tics and co-occurring conditions can be a big deal. And there are days when it's all we can do just to get through the day and get home, and it can pose challenges. I think when you're in an interview or when you're disclosing in the workforce, it's almost often in your best interest to not get into some of the personal details about it and really be matter of fact and really showcase it as something that you are managing, that you're on top of. We don't want these employers to have any kind of doubt about you or suspicion. Okay, are they going to be able to do the work or any of that? So I like to show you're on top of it. That's why I mentioned I've had it since I was a kid, and put in some of those comments to put any worries at ease that they may have. Generally, my advice, if you are in the hiring process, is to wait until either you tick or there is a moment where you want to disclose. Maybe they notice something or you're feeling particularly anxious. Then you can go into a disclosure. There are some cases where candidates want to disclose in advance. Maybe you have verbal tics, you have some vocal tics that might be happening in the interview, and it may put you at ease to just get it out there in the open, let them know before the interview that you have tics. If you feel more comfortable, you can let them know over email in advance of the interview. And same thing, I generally recommend just being very concise about it. Just matter of fact, I've got this. You may notice that I make some sounds and noises during the interview, and that's my Tourette. Whether you use the name of it or not and name your diagnosis is up to you. Personally, I think it can be helpful to give them that context, but legally, you don't have to name what the diagnosis is. That leads us to the next topic, which is around accommodations. If we're talking about tics and co-occurring conditions possibly interfering or even just coming up in the interview process or on the job, it may be worth considering whether accommodations would be beneficial in your case. When we talk about accommodations, we often think about stuff in school for students. Some people know that you can also get accommodations on the job. That could be with taking extra breaks or being able to do work remotely. It could mean a modified workspace, so being able to get your work done in a quieter space or using noise canceling headphones. It could be things like using assistive technology, like a speech to text software, perhaps applications to help with organization. It can mean a lot of different things. You're really limited only by your imagination and what you and the organization think is a reasonable accommodation. By law, organizations are required to provide reasonable accommodations. Reasonable basically means what would not pose an undue burden on the business. Purchasing noise canceling headphones for you is usually pretty straightforward, pretty easy. They can get that done. If you were asking them to build you a whole separate office cubicle that was going to cost a lot of money and time and possibly impact productivity of other workers, the more it starts becoming a larger ask, the more the company has room to kind of push back on your request. But generally what I recommend is asking for what has worked for you in the past, and also bringing in a doctor's note from your physician that maybe lists out a couple of accommodations that you're looking for. And I find that can go a long way. Now, another really great resource that I recommend is called the Job Accommodation Network. It's JAN. And if you go to askjan.org, they have a whole repository of information about medical accommodations in the workplace. You can actually filter by condition, by diagnosis, and there is a spot for Tourette Syndrome. They also have ADHD. Some of the other co-occurring conditions on there, OCD is on there. And you can get examples of accommodations that have helped many other people with your diagnosis, and they'll list them out in bullets. Not exhaustive list, but a pretty detailed list of accommodations. And that's something to look through and see, all right, which of these might be helpful in my job? I do strongly recommend going on their site and looking at it. They also do have templates you can use for requesting accommodations. So how do you have that conversation with your manager or with someone in human resources where you're requesting accommodations? I recommend being direct and clear, something like, I have a condition that requires certain accommodations to perform at my best. And you can offer some information that's relevant to your job and your job performance without over-explaining. I would focus on solutions. So instead of saying, I can't do X, I would personally frame it as, I can do my best work if we adjust Y, if I get this accommodation because of my tics, because of anxiety, because of ADHD. It would allow me to do my work best and be best for the company if, and then you ask for that accommodation. That's kind of how I frame it. For example, something like, I find that having written instructions instead of just verbal ones helps me complete tasks more accurately. And that could be one way to phrase that. If the accommodation you're looking for is to get assignments in writing. You can also give examples of past accommodations that have worked. So you could say, in my last role, a flexible starting time really helped me manage my focus, and I believe it'd be beneficial here as well. Something a lot of people don't know is that not only can you request accommodations on the job, you can also request them as a job seeker while you're in the hiring process. This is something that a lot of people don't do. I think in part because people don't know that it's something they can do. I think it's also people want to avoid being discriminated against. You might notice that sometimes on job descriptions, it has a little note at the bottom, usually with their EEO statement, where they talk about, we do not discriminate on the basis of race, gender, religion, ethnicity. There may be a statement about there, something like, if you require reasonable accommodations to go through this interview process, please contact us at, and it'll give a phone number and or an email address. I actually would encourage candidates to use that if you think that's something that you benefit from and qualify for. One reason I recommend it would be that as opposed to just being in an interview and you disclose there, if you email in advance and ask for some accommodations in that interview process, you're already putting it in writing. And I think companies that are cautious and don't want to end up in any kind of lawsuit or doing things wrong legally, when you've got that formal request in writing that you want an accommodation in the hiring process, I think they're going to be more likely to take your candidacy seriously. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to interview you or give you the job or any of that. But I would say that it's more likely you'd be taken seriously as a candidate. From having worked in human resources and in recruiting, when companies get that email from a candidate and they are requesting accommodations, that is it triggers sort of a formal legal process. And companies want to make sure that they do that correctly so that they don't get hit with a lawsuit or anything else down the road. So it is something for candidates. If you've been having trouble getting interviews and you suspect that it could be because maybe you have all your Tourette's advocacy on your resume and they're seeing that, and you suspect it might be because of disability concerns, or maybe you don't have the experience or something, and it's one of those cases of, hey, if I could just get in front of a person and interview with a real person, I can take it from there and get the job. You may find it's in your best interest to reach out to the company, and you can request accommodations in the interview process or for the interview process. The Job Accommodations Network has some resources on this. It would be things like getting questions in writing instead of just verbally, interview questions. It might also be an accommodation like, let's say you have a final round on-site interview where you go in person to do the interview. You can request to have your interviews in a quiet room, or maybe all of your interviews, if they're going to have you meet with a few other people, maybe those interviews all take place in the same room so that you're not moving from room to room. You would just need to think about what accommodations would support you given your needs as a neurodivergent professional and frame it in that way. And that's another thing that I think candidates could try, that if you're struggling in this job market with getting interviews or even getting through your interviews, ask yourself whether there are accommodations out there that you'd be qualified for. that could support you in this case. Something that goes a long way with rising professionals, people earlier in their career, especially, is framing some of the neurodivergent challenges you've had, really framing them as a strength or as an opportunity. I've heard candidates with ADHD tell employers in the interview, well, my hyper focus can lead to deep attention to detail, and that benefits me with tasks that require precision and accuracy, like data entry and data analysis. People that are programmers can talk about how they're really meticulous with reading their lines of code and checking over it. And they attribute that to their ADHD and the hyper focus that they can go into. Don't be reluctant to talk about how your condition's a superpower and how it gives you these assets that other candidates might not have. I think that the interview is a great time to go into some of that, especially if they ask you questions about your background, about overcoming adversity, about why you're a good fit for this job. Feel free to highlight any problem-solving skills you have, creativity, resilience. I personally remember saying earlier on in my career, right out of college, I would say things like, my experience in growing up with Tourette Syndrome has given me great problem-solving skills. I've learned how to adapt in real time to different challenges. I talked about the resilience and grit that came from that. So definitely something that you can bring up as well and use that to frame you as a hardworking person that is committed to doing great work. While we're on the topic of interviews, I want to say that interviewing is a two-way street. Yes, the company is trying to talk to you and understand your background. Are you a good fit? All of that. It's also your chance to interview them and learn about the company and if this is a place where you'd want to be. I do recommend asking some questions about their culture, about if this is a company that values neurodiversity and in what ways does the company do that. You could even ask the person if they can share some examples of how the company or the manager fosters an inclusive culture. I think some of those questions are nice to add in there as well, just to make sure that this is the kind of place that you want to be at and see if this is the kind of team that you want to be a part of. Just be mindful that the person you're talking to may or may not have all the answers to that. I think if you're talking to a recruiter, they'll be able to speak to the culture of the company. If you're speaking to the hiring manager or the person that would be your boss, that's where you can ask a little more around how they manage the team inclusively, any kind of topic around that that's on your mind that would help you get a better understanding of if this is the kind of team you want, if this is the kind of manager that you want to report to. All right, so now I want to share some tips on the job search side. So when you're looking for a job, applying to jobs, filling out applications, writing little elevator pitches and summaries why you're qualified for the job, I see a lot of people putting a lot of time into their job applications. And I hope that with some tips I can share, I can maybe make it a little easier. I want to speak for a minute about applicant tracking systems and how these work. You may have come across the term applicant tracking system or ATS. These are automated tools that help recruiters sift through hundreds or thousands of applications that they've received for a given job. These are tools that are meant to make the recruiter's life easier, not our life as job applicants. And I will also say that these tools are kind of archaic and not very smart. They're not smart tools. There are some getting developed and have some more advanced capabilities and can do like predictive work and stuff. But for the most part, most companies are using older ATSs. If they're going to do anything at all, they mostly look at your resume and they look at the job description and they look at how similar those two are. And so if your resume has a lot of words on it and phrases on it that are also in the job description, your resume may get pushed to kind of the front of the line if their system works that way. Some do, some don't. But when we talk about tailoring the resume to a job, this is a lot of what it means. It's making sure that your resume showcases the ways in which you are relevant and qualified for that job. And you can actually use a tool like ChatGPT to make this easier. You can open a session of ChatGPT, put in a prompt like, I will paste in a job description and I want you to tell me the top 20 skills that you see listed in this job description. And please prioritize hard skills over soft skills. Okay, here is the job description, and then just paste it in. You can just copy and paste the job description from the site, the summary, the activities, the qualifications, and that's it. You don't necessarily need the wording at the bottom or anything else. And then hit enter. You will generate a list of what it sees are the top skills on that job. And then those skills are ones I would read through, and if I have them, I'd make sure that those appear in the skills section of my resume. I'd copy and paste them into my resume, and if those are indeed skills that I have. And that's a quick way to get some more words on your resume that are in the job description. Another thing you can do is add a statement to the top of your resume. We used to call this the objective statement. Now it's kind of evolved into the summary statement. And basically it's recruiters will glance at your resume. They may spend, I don't know what the stat is. I've heard 6 seconds, 8 seconds, 12 seconds on a resume. So what we want to do is we want the best things to jump out at them right away. We want to make sure that if they're just skimming your resume, that they see what they need to see. And they're like, wow, this person sounds interesting. They sound like they could be a good fit. Let me get on the phone with them. Let's offer them an interview. And so one way you can do that is putting a statement under your name, under the contact info, or near the top of your resume. And you can even use it a header like summary or overview or something like that. Put a little bit of information about your background there. I normally like to put in the number of years of work experience you have, and then the field that you work in. It could be project manager with 5 years of experience in the tech industry, specializing in operations and team management. Something like that that's really succinct and it's got some keywords in there. And those keywords would ideally be things that are in the job description. So if this is for a job that's operations and team manager, you've got both of those terms in your summary statement. You can write this in a sentence fragment form. It's not an English paper. Normally, they recommend that you don't use I or me or personal pronouns like that. You can also get rid of words like a, an, or the, and just go right into it. Tech professional with 5 years experience seeking jobs in XYZ, or marketing analyst and recent college grad looking for digital marketing and event planning jobs. Whatever it is that summarizes your professional background in 1 to 3 sentences or sentence fragments. There's no golden model or template on how it has to be, but think about how best you can showcase your professional self and put that on your resume as a placeholder. And then when you see the job you're applying to, if you see some wording in there that you're like, ooh, I like that. That does describe me. You can leverage words and short phrases from the job description. I wouldn't copy paste an entire sentence or two. I'd probably use a phrase that's maybe 4 or 5 words. It will help get you through the applicant tracking system because it shows that your resume is more similar to the job post. There's some good tools out there that you can use that will look at your resume and also a job description that you paste into it, and it'll tell you how similar your resume is to the job. And it'll also give you some advice on how you can tailor your resume. One of the ones that I use is called jobscan.co. That's jobscan.co. You get something like 5 free resume uploads a month. You can also pay for an account, but normally the free version is enough for my clients' needs. You can also ask ChatGPT to write you a summary that you can put at the top of your resume that uses specific words from the job description. So I would say something in ChatGPT like, I will paste in my resume and I will paste in a job description, and I want you to write me a 1 to 3 sentence summary statement that can go at the top of my resume that is optimized for this job. Hit enter and see what it gives you. And just make sure that it's using enough words from that job post, but that can be an easy way to do it as well. So use the tools we have out there to really simplify that process. Take maybe 5 or 10 minutes or so. It may be more if it's a job you really are serious about. Some companies care a lot more about how you showcase your background when you apply. So nonprofits care a lot about this. Any kind of mission-driven organization, social impact organizations, it might make more sense to put a little bit more time and thought into your application. But generally, you'll want to prioritize sending out more applications so that we can get you some more interviews sooner. If you work in any kind of creative capacity, so this could be programmers and software engineers, or it could be graphic designers, people that make marketing content, social media, it may be helpful to have a portfolio that showcases your work. And what I would recommend for this is having a kind of a table of contents for it or some kind of organization with it so they can find what they need. Basically, this is a document or a web page that you can put on your resume as a link and also send it to anyone that asks for it. If a company is interviewing you and they ask for your portfolio, you can send them along the link to it. but it showcases some examples of your work. You can take things that you've done in college, in internships, just remove any company language, or if there's any kind of confidential stuff in there, make sure that it's anonymized and you got rid of any of that. But I recommend having something like that that showcases the work you've done, because it is an easy way to give you that credibility when someone is trying to do their due diligence and look up your candidacy, look up your resume. If they can click a link and see a PDF of some of the work you've done, that's always a nice thing to have. I'd like to share some tools that I recommend using. This is more for job seekers, so people looking for a job. This can also help some neurodivergent candidates. These are some that people with ADHD, autistic individuals have recommended to me as well. So I've been compiling a list of what I hear work, some of the tools that are out there that you may find useful. One of them is called hunter.co, huntr.co. It's a Google Chrome extension, and it'll let you save jobs in one click so you can come back to them later and apply. It's a good way to stay organized. They also have a phone app. Another one is tealhq.com, teal like the color, TEAL, HQ.com. It's a kind of a tracker job search management program, we'll call it. So basically, it's a way you can keep track of all your job apps and your interviews and when they're coming up. I like to use ones like this with my ADHD so I can be on top of my interviews. I also really use Google Calendar diligently, and I put all the info that I need into that invite for the meeting. Let's say someone puts a meeting on my calendar. I might create another meeting at that same time where I just have all of my information and kind of preparation for that meeting. If I need to reference anything or notes, I've got it ready in there, and I save it to the meeting. tealhq.com also has a free job tracker spreadsheet, and you can find that at tealhq.com/tools/job-tracker. This is so you can stay organized as you're applying to jobs. Finally, I'd recommend the Neurodiversity Career Connector, which is an interesting site for finding inclusive, neurodivergent friendly companies. There's a lot of sites out there and you can just even Google like neurodivergent friendly companies and look for companies that have won an award in it or have some kind of recognition in this space. That's one way to do it. But this site is another one. It's ndcc.simplifyhire.com. And we'll make sure all of these links are listed along in the description for this podcast episode. No need to try to remember them right now or write them down. We'll make sure that you've got them in the description so you can find them easily. There's another organization out there. It's called the National Disability Rights Network, or the NDRN. National Disability Rights Network is a really great organization. They help with making sure people with disabilities get their rights protected in the workplace. So if you feel that you have been discriminated against, or you have a question about something that happened, you're not really sure if it was a case of some kind of discrimination or not, they are a place you can go to ask questions as well. They have a lot of support on their site. The way it works is they have a chapter in each state of the country has their chapter of the NDRN. So you can look up National Disability Rights Network, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, wherever you are, and go to your state's chapter. They have attorneys that work for them, and you can ask them questions that you have. It can be a point of contact if you need to make a claim, file a case. They have their own attorneys that can talk to you, but also if you're looking to get an employment lawyer who specializes in disability rights, they can also make a referral to someone private who can help you as well. So a good resource to turn to. I've recommended it to a lot of people. It's something that you don't have to feel like you're alone and in the dark with this stuff. If you do have a question, you can reach out to them and they can give you some of the legal information there. And that's about it. There's a lot more we could discuss, but I want to keep this high level enough to keep it relevant to a lot of people. There's a lot of support and resources out there. Please don't hesitate to use them. You can also reach out to the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome for physician referrals and other information and to get some questions answered. But please take advantage of the support that's out there. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Uptick. Hope you have a wonderful week here, and we will see you again in 2 weeks.
Thank you for listening to The Uptick, brought to you by the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders, empowering you to stretch the boundaries to live your best life. The NJ Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders, NJCTS, its directors and employees assume no responsibility for the accuracy, completeness, objectivity, or usefulness of the information presented on this podcast. We do not endorse any recommendation or opinion made by any guest, nor do we advocate any treatment.